11 days. That is all that separates us from the opening match of the 2026 World Cup. 11 days until the Azteca fills with noise, until the first ball is kicked in the biggest football tournament ever staged, until 48 nations begin the journey that only one will complete. And on the eve of all of that, instead of the conversation being about Mbappe's form or Messi's farewell or England's latest attempt to finally end 50 years of hurt, the story that is dominating football across every platform and every publication is this. FIFA is under formal legal investigation on American soil 11 days before their tournament begins. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey have issued subpoenas to FIFA as part of a formal investigation into allegedly deceptive ticketing practices ahead of the 2026 World Cup. GB News subpoenas legal documents compelling FIFA to hand over internal records about how they set their prices and how they defined and marketed their seating categories. This is not a fan petition. This is not a social media campaign. This is the legal apparatus of two American states formally examining whether the organization running the World Cup on their doorstep broke consumer protection law. If you have followed football long enough to remember when a World Cup ticket was something an ordinary working person could genuinely aspire to, when the dream of attending the game was not separated from the reality of it by a wall of thousands of dollars, then what has happened with 2026 ticketing will feel like something has been taken from the sport you love, because something has. Let me take you through exactly what happened and why it matters far beyond the numbers. When FIFA announced that 2026 would use dynamic pricing, a system where ticket costs fluctuate in real time based on demand, the same model airlines use, the same model concert promoters use, the football world raised an eyebrow. It was the first time a World Cup had ever used this approach, and the concern was immediate and understandable. The World Cup is not a concert. It is not from London to New York that you can choose not to take. For millions of fans, it is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to watch their national team compete on the greatest stage, the sport, as the emotional leverage that creates is unlike anything in ordinary commerce. FIFA pressed ahead regardless. Prices for more than 90 matches reportedly rose between October 2025 and April 2026, with an investigation by The Athletic finding increases of around 25% for games in Mexico and Canada. GB News, 25% increases after fans had already planned their trips, after some had already booked flights and accommodation based on the prices they saw. The price they budgeted for in October was not the price they paid in April. The tournament had not changed. The matches had not changed. The demand had shifted, and FIFA's dynamic pricing system had shifted with it, upward, always upward, and the fans who had been loyal enough to plan early were the ones who felt it most. Tickets range from $380 to $33,000 for the final at MetLife Stadium. Resale prices have reportedly reached $2 million. News Now, $2 million on the resale market for a football match. There are people in the stands at every World Cup, good people, genuine football people, the kind of supporter who has followed their national team through qualifying defeats and gone home and come back for more, who cannot spend $200 on a ticket, not because they don't want to, because their life doesn't allow it. And the idea that the seat next to them at the final is being traded on the secondary market for $2 million. That is not an abstract injustice. It is a statement about who the World Cup now thinks it is for. Football Supporters Europe and Euro consumers filed an official complaint against FIFA, accusing it of setting overly high ticket prices, claiming FIFA has abused its monopoly position when determining ticket prices for the tournament. The Royal Observer, monopoly, that word is important because it captures something that gets lost when this conversation is framed purely as a market pricing debate. FIFA does not compete with anyone for the right to sell World Cup tickets. There is no alternative. If you want to attend the World Cup, you buy from FIFA or you buy from the secondary market that FIFA's own pricing decisions helped inflate. FIFA holds a monopoly over ticket sales for the 2026 World Cup, and has used that power to impose conditions on fans that would never be acceptable in a competitive market. Hello, that is not a fringe opinion. That is the formal position of some of European football's most established supporter organizations, and they filed it with the European Commission. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that goes beyond pricing, because the legal investigation is not only about how much tickets cost, it is about something arguably more troubling. Officials say fans may have been misled about seat locations after FIFA changed stadium maps following purchases. Geo News changed the maps after purchase. A fan sits in a queue for hours, and queues for popular matches stretch to hours. We know this. Finds a ticket in the section they want, pays the price they see, receives their confirmation, and then discovers that the seat they thought they bought is not the seat the confirmation describes. The zone map has changed. The seat is now behind the goal on the other side of the stadium. Lifelong football fan Brett Przinski found welcome news in the investigation after he felt shorted by FIFA when purchasing tickets online. After waiting in a queue for hours, he found 2 desirable tickets at the Seattle Stadium. He purchased the tickets for $515 each. Minutes later, he got his confirmation email, and his seats were in a completely different spot behind the goal on the opposite side of the stadium. Geo News, $515 each for seats he did not buy in a location he did not choose. No one should be manipulated into paying sky-high prices for seats, and fans should be able to trust that the tickets they purchase will be the ones they receive. GB News. That statement should not need to be made. It should be the baseline assumption of any ticketing system for any event that what you pay for is what you receive. The fact that it had to be said formally, legally by an attorney general tells you something about how far the situation had drifted from any reasonable standard of consumer fairness. FIFA's response to all of this has been consistent throughout. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has had an answer when asked about the sky-high ticket prices for this summer's World Cup. They are simply adapting to the North American market. Adapting to the North American market, that is the explanation for prices that, by any historical comparison with previous World Cups, represent a transformation rather than an adaptation. The lowest priced final tickets currently available to the public are more than 7 times higher than the cheapest tickets for the 2022 World Cup final. The projected cost for one person to attend 8 World Cup matches is at the lowest tier over £5,000, rising to over $8,000 for mid-range tickets and over $12,000 for premium seats. This represents a huge jump from the previous tournament, where attending 7 games would have cost £1,400, £2,600, or £3,900, respectively. The Royal Observer, 7 times higher at the lowest end for a tournament that was marketed explicitly repeatedly as the most accessible World Cup in history. The tournament that would bring football to the widest possible audience. The tournament that football unites the world. Those words ring differently now. I want to put this in historical context, because if you've been watching football long enough, you'll remember what it felt like when the World Cup felt like it genuinely belonged to the people who loved the game. Italia 90, France 98, even South Africa 2010 with all its logistical complexity, there was a sense at those tournaments that the supporters in the stands were primarily football people. People who had saved, who had planned, who had been waiting for years. The atmosphere those fans created was inseparable from the tournament itself. The color and the noise and the scarves and the flags and the songs that don't translate perfectly into any language, but every football person understands immediately. All of that came from fans who had been priced in. The concern now is not that wealthy fans will attend 2026. Of course, they will. The concern is that the balance shifts, that the stands filled with corporate hospitality and investment banker tickets and people who are there because they can afford to be, rather than because football is the organizing passion of their lives. And you can feel that difference in a stadium. Any serious football person can. The noise is different. The investment is different. The moment a great goal is scored and you look around you, the quality of that shared experience depends enormously on who is in the ground. The problem is that such an approach may price some fans out of the market, resulting in a crowd that has more affluent socio-demographic features. Good morning, America. That is a careful academic way of saying something that football supporters feel viscerally, that the World Cup risks becoming a tournament watched by people who can afford $33,000 seats rather than felt by people for whom the football is everything. And there is a practical consequence of that shift that is already visible in the data, because the pricing decisions are not just generating anger, they are generating empty seats. Plenty of tickets remain unsold. Anyone up for $1,300 front-level tickets for the Haiti versus Scotland group stage matchup in Foxborough on June 13th, International Business Times. Haiti versus Scotland, a group stage match, $1,300 for a front-level seat unsold. Think about that from a pure tournament quality perspective, a match that should have a full stadium, that should have noise and atmosphere and the electricity that only a crowd of football people can generate, potentially playing in front of gaps because the pricing removed the fans who would have filled those gaps and created that atmosphere. And the premium buyers who were supposed to replace them either didn't come or haven't committed. There is some concern matches could be more sparsely attended than expected due to the extreme ticket prices, the News International. Sparsely attended at the World Cup, the sentence that nobody who loves this sport wanted to read 11 days before it begins. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. The legal investigation by New York and New Jersey is moving quickly. Subpoenas have already been issued, documentation has been requested, and sports lawyer Alexander Rojas believes the investigations could have significant consequences for FIFA. Whether those consequences arrive before July 19th, before the final that sits at the center of the most expensive ticket scandal in football history, is another question, Royal Insider. California's Attorney General has also raised concerns. California Attorney General Rob Bonta said the state sent a letter to FIFA raising concerns about reports of potentially misleading ticketing practices. The legal pressure is building from multiple directions simultaneously. FIFA has not publicly commented on the investigation, and the tournament is 11 days away. The realistic best case is that the football, once it begins, once Mbappe runs at a defense in a packed stadium, once an African nation produces one of those giant killing moments that remind you why the World Cup matters, reasserts itself as the story, that the legal proceedings move slowly enough not to disrupt the tournament itself, that the atmosphere, at least in the matches and cities where demand has been strongest, is everything a World Cup should be. The more difficult scenario is one where the legal investigation generates headlines throughout the tournament, where images of partially filled stadiums at group stage matches become the backdrop to coverage that should be about the football, where the conversation that should be about the greatest players on the planet is instead about subpoenas and seating maps and dynamic pricing. There is a question worth sitting with as we approach June 11th, and I'd genuinely be curious what you think. A World Cup that generates $13 billion for FIFA, that sells some tickets for $33,000, that is under legal investigation for misleading consumers, and that may have partially emptied its own stadiums through the pricing decisions it made. Is that a tournament that got its priorities right, or did something important get lost along the way? The football will be extraordinary. It almost always is. The players arrive at these tournaments carrying the weight of their nations, and they produce moments of such quality and such drama that everything else becomes background. But football at its best has always been about the connection between what happens on the pitch and the people in the stands who have given something real to be there. That connection is what makes a World Cup different from every other competition, and it is fragile, more fragile than the revenue projections suggest. 11 days of the Aztecas, the greatest show in football. Let's hope the stands are full of people who are there because they love it. If this kind of football conversation is what you come here for, like genuinely helps, and a subscription means you won't miss what comes next, tell me in the comments, do you think the ticket scandal changes how you feel about this tournament? I read every response Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It is a moment in time, and 2026 is going to be one of them, for better or worse.